afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to see all of you over here at our presentation. We're going to hold this presentation in English. Well, it's not just me. I have a colleague with me. You know, at my age, I better always have a backup. Yeah, so my backup is my colleague, Christoph Solka, and let me right away use this to introduce a team which is working on the statistics in the majority for the EMS industry, but meanwhile, we are working on the PCB industry as well. It starts with Dr. Mareike Haas, who is sitting in the back, my colleague. She is a very important analyst digger, and she normally digs very deep to get all the data out of the internet. That is very important. Then to my left, I have Christoph Solka. He is officially employed with IPC in Munich, that is IPC Electronics Europe GmbH. And IPC is having a big office in Munich. We are now, I think, a total of 10 people in Munich. And there are two people who are officially employed by IPC but work for Informa, and that is Christoph to my left, and Anastasia Edra, who is at the moment answering the phone in Munich. Now, as you might know, the main support for our work comes from different associations, the majority one being IPC, but on top of that we have a lot of other associations. We even have the president of one of them over here with Dirk Staans, who is the president of the FHI in the Netherlands. Who is supporting as well. Thank you, Dirk. In addition, we have Svensk Electronic, we have in Hungary Melt, we have in Moldova Akem, we have in Switzerland IG Exact, and in Estonia, we are now working with them for the last 10 years. Other than that, we have a total of about 70 supporters who are today a little bit slow. They are a little bit slow building up. They're not building up somehow. You just need to use your imagination that you're going to see 70 logos of EMS companies over here and suppliers. Unfortunately, they don't build up for whatever reason. And now let's start with our presentation.
Okay, hello everyone. I would like to start with something that we do know not super exact, but I think we have a good overview of what is out there. So the global EMS and ODM industry in the world is distributed from west to east. So starting in the west, we have around 2,000 companies in the US, 80 in Canada, 100 in Mexico. Europe we estimate to be 2,400 actually, Middle East and Africa 200, China 7,500, Japan and Korea 1,000, and in India and Thailand and so on, this is 2,500 companies. So what is also very interesting and something where many different numbers are out is the size of the market. So it depends who you ask. It's ranges between, let's say, 539 billion and 744 billion. So the average is 628 billion US dollars. It's important that you pick one and then you continue with that. We go with the NVR, which has the number $638 billion. But what we do know more exact, that is the global top 10 EMS companies in 2024. And this is, the same old, so to say. It's Foxconn on the top, having 214 billion US dollar, which is a third of the total market actually, which is pretty huge. And then if you look at the top 10 global, this is 2/3 of the total market. And then in the top 20, if you have the top 20, you already cover 70% of the total market. But that doesn't mean that the small companies are not important, because if you think about in high and low volume, high and low mix, the low volume, high mix companies, products are served by the small companies. So what is also very interesting to see is revenue-wise, where are we Europeans on a global scale? So what you can see here, the Europeans, we range between 9 and 7% actually. And what we saw lately in 23 and 24 is a downturn. And this is what we see as a bullwhip effect, but more to this later.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christoph. And if you look at the European share, it's running between 7 and 9%. Those of you who attended the presentation from Dirk, he presented a different number of about 16.6%, but that included the OEMs. Yeah, and you can easily you can easily say it is still about 57% of electronics being manufactured by OEMs and 43% being manufactured by EMS companies. Now, if we look at that, and I don't have this pie chart for 2024, it's too early. We are not able to gather all these data at the same time. In 23, we were talking about 154 billion in PCBAs. That was the market size. And of that, nearly 62% came from the OEMs. 4% came from OEMs who imported this from outside Europe. Then we have 34% coming from EMS companies. We have 1.7 or nearly 2% coming from EMS companies with factories outside Europe. Then we have PCBAs, 4% coming from global EMS who imports them, and then Asian competition at the moment is about 4%, and I can assure you that will definitely change. Now you know this chart because we always show it, but it's never the same because this chart changes every time we work on it, and I can already assure you it is wrong. It's always wrong, because we are probably missing about 1 to 2% of the companies which we have not found because we work more in a quiet area, mainly being small companies. But once in a while, we are lucky to find even bigger companies. Actually, I just see that it is wrong because since the exhibition focus on PCB in Vicenza, we now know that there are 2 companies in EMS companies in Albania. So that is the thing we experience the most, and that's why we always have a revision status on most important charts. In the upper right corner, you always see the revision status, and you can immediately check, is that an old one or is it a newer one? Now, if we then look at the distribution of the companies, it is interesting. There is only 4 companies with more than 1 billion in revenues. And if you separate the company between companies with more than 50 million and less than 50 million, you see that actually only 136 companies are companies who make more than 50 million in revenues, and they have about 81% of the market. Whereas on the other side, on the lower side, you see about 1,822 companies, and they have only about 19% of the market. That brings me already to the summary before we go into the details why we can show this data. That is the development over the last 11 years. And our forecast for at the moment is standing at minus 14% for all of Europe for 2024 revenues for the EMS industry. And at the moment, we still think that Eastern Europe might be hit a little bit more with 15, and Western Europe being hit with minus 13. But don't be happy already, because when we get to Germany, you will see that Germany has a red lantern and had the biggest problem.
So I would like to, or you would have wondered why we all know all of this. Well, it's a survey that we do, and actually we have 427 participants to our survey, which covers 42% of the total European EMS business. And if you participate, it's of course good, because then we have better market numbers And this every participant also receives like a report, which is very helpful for benchmarking purposes. So this is highly recommended and asked, please. And the survey participation shown by country. So in Germany, we have 138 of 553 companies, and this is 67% of the market. In the Baltics, we are very strong. We have 95% of the market. In Switzerland, it's the half, but overall, we can say in DACH, we are very good. Some other countries, like for example, Spain, are still a little underrepresented. And this is particularly interesting because it shows you the distribution of the change of the 427 EMS in Europe, 23 to 24. And of course, the red ones on the left are the ones who lost, and the blue ones on the right are the ones who gained. And you can see, okay, this goes down up to minus 40% actually. And on the right hand, on the other side, some also had very high gains. And even 28 companies had to close shop actually. But important is not everybody suffered. Some were able to increase.
Just to jump in over here, if you are an EMS company, you have the chance to participate in those statistics, which are not only free of charge for you. You will receive 2 months after the end of the calendar year a 70 to 80 page report about it, which is an ideal benchmark. Just imagine you are an EMS company and you want to see where you are positioned in the market. Yeah, you know your own results. And then you can immediately see, where am I? Am I somewhere over here? Or am I lucky to be only here? Yeah? So there is no better benchmark, and more companies are using our data as a source for their annual report, and they mention in their annual report their own results in comparison to the market average.
And now more in detail, the market. How did the market develop by country? Actually see Germany did very bad, if I may say so, minus 17.8%. Poland also is to mention, minus 23%. There is one outlier, so to say. This is UK. In UK, this has a technical reason because of the fiscal year. So the fiscal year is different at most UK companies. So we cover here older data, so to say. This is why this picture looks a little bit different. What's also very interesting or very important to notice, in total, it's a decline of minus 14%. However, if you look on the right-hand side, you see just minus 2% when it comes to the headcount. And this is quite interesting. More to that later.
Thank you. I think that's still yours.
This is still mine. Oh, thank you. This is like the top 25 European EMS, ODM in Europe. And yeah, Zollner, unfought number 1 here. And then followed by GPV, Scanfil, and so on. What is important to mention is that there is a lot of movement in those numbers. If you look, for example, at the number, I believe it is, which one is it? 12, no, not 12, also 12 grew from 17 to 12, of course. But I was thinking about C-Corp, but more to this later.
Yeah, because Europe, and we're going to see that again in Germany. Now, if we still do compare Europe or split up Europe in East and West. And that we do not as a political statement. We do it simply for the reason that within Europe, we still have a huge difference in labor cost. Eastern Europe has much lower labor cost. And in actual fact, if you analyze Germany, even between Eastern Germany and Western Germany, you still have a difference of about 20 to 25% in labor cost. And we heard that so often from our politicians, they're going to change that. They have done nothing about it. We still have this situation. Yeah? And yes, it is being used. It's being used especially by the big companies. And that's why the red one you see, 10 companies in Eastern Europe with more than 500 million. And that is all the big ones, the Flex, the Jabills, the Plexus, the Foxcons. They all settle up over there. and we only have few companies in Western Europe who are having this size. On the other hand, then in the middle field and in the lower field, we see more companies in Western Europe. And if you sum it up, we are talking about 1,900 companies in Western Europe and about 450 companies in Eastern Europe. So it's much less. But those 450 companies nearly make the same revenues as the 1,900 in the West. Because the companies in the West, some of them are 50, 60, 70 years old. I forgot it now, but I think Zollner celebrated its 80s. Well, no, it wasn't that, 50s, 55 years old. So you don't, or you rarely find companies of that age in Eastern Europe. Now, when we ask the annual survey, we ask as well the companies for their order backlog. What we do then is we take the revenues of the full group and we divide it by 240 working days. And that gives us a revenue per working day. And we use this number to divide it with the order backlog. And with that, we get a theoretical range of how long an order backlog lasts. Now, we need to be careful. We're going to see that later in a chart when we talk about DACH. This is misleading in this chart because it assumes that the revenue per working day was done on a full workload. And we all know that 2024 didn't have a full workload. A lot of companies were only working 4 days a week or so. So therefore, it is misleading. It shows a picture too good. The actual picture is definitely worse. Now, if we then take the revenue per head, and Christoph mentioned it, that people had substantially lower revenues, but did not adjust the headcount, because they all think, well, we need those people, and hopefully the business is going to return, and when it returns, we need the people again, and we better stick to them. But that as well means that productivity decreases as revenue per head is decreasing. And if you look at Germany, for example, we're talking about a productivity decrease of 16.8%, and if we look at all Europe, we're talking about a productivity decrease of 12.2%.
Yeah, and when we want to understand the history of the last years, we especially need to look for inventory. So what you can see here is that the inventory levels are somewhere between, how should I say, 20 in the high 20s, low 30% at the moment. But on the average between 2015 and 19, this was 15%. So we see we are way above average actually. And the question is, why is that? And we think this is because of the chip crisis led to over-ordering and stockpiling. So a lot of inventory was built up because of the lack of chips, so to say. And some countries still have very, very high, but overall it is decreasing the numbers. And this is very interesting here, because when we do our survey, we also ask the participant what is their expectation for the future. And what we can see, only few countries expect a bad year 25 actually. This is in Germany, this is in Austria, this is in the Benelux countries and so on. But when it comes to 26, most companies are already very positive, maybe even too positive.
That brings me to the point that a lot of people still talk about 2024 to have a general global economic slowdown. Sorry to say that, that's bullshit. There was no economic slowdown, and I'm on purpose using a totally different branch. I like chocolates, so I used numbers from Lindt and Sprüngli in Switzerland. Now you might remember that last year cocoa prices increased by 385%. That is as if you in your business had all of a sudden price increases for the semiconductors of 385%. And the question is, would you still be able to improve your numbers? Well, these guys are. Because if you look at their revenues 2024, they were able to increase their revenues by 7.8% in an organic growth, no additional acquisitions. In Europe, 9.5%, in North America, 5%, and in the rest of the world, 10%. And not only that, what is even more important is the profits. They were able to increase the profits by 8.7%. So, and for this year, they are forecasting 7 to 9% organic growth. So please give me a break. Don't talk about a global slowdown of the industry. There was no global slowdown of the industry. Our problems in the electronics industry were homemade, yeah? And they were due to this famous chip crisis, and I'm not repeating it. I talked about it last year in length. I talked about the toilet paper crisis, and I used other comparisons to explain it to you. But over here today, I would like to explain the problem to you using global companies who have subsidiaries in Europe as well. And the more difficult part is that they all have different fiscal years. They have fiscal years deviating from the calendar year. But still, we use those numbers and we analyze those numbers. And as usual, in all statistical models, you have some companies who perform different. And over here, it was Celestica who in 2024 was able, in their fiscal year 2024, which happens to be the calendar year, was able to increase the revenues by 21.2%. Yeah? Whereas if you take all 7 companies in total, their revenues in 2024 declined by 8.5%. Now let's go a year back, or 2 years back. Let's look at the development from 21 to 22 and have a look. Celestica is having a different pattern. Yeah? While everybody was doing well, Celestica did worse with minus 7.8%. But on average, those companies had revenue plus in 2022 of 28.5%. And if we then compare this development from 22 to 23, you already see that some companies are getting weaker, and on average, it was still plus 4.2%. Now, the problem on this is simply the fact that it is fiscal year. It's difficult to compare it. But we took the time, or better, Christoph took the time to analyze it by taking the individual quarters and adjusting them to a calendar quarter.
Yeah, and this is very interesting to look at this adjusted quarters actually, and what you can see, this is year over year, and you see in the first quarter 2022 it's plus 13, increasing plus 19, plus 19, plus 12, so double-digit growth here, quarter year over year. And when you look at 23, 24, it all starts positive, 11 plus, 6 plus, but then we see a shift actually. And now this basically it decreased, and basically we saw lower orders from the customers, and we have like a reverse situation, like going down the sinus curve like that, where we see, okay, this is a decrease. And for that, we also took the work to visualize this in a chart where we have the 7 global EMS from the calendar year 21 to 24. And if you look at the first 8 quarters, you see plus 35%. In the next quarters, you see minus 12.4% actually at those quarters. And especially if you look at the shape of this, you can see a sinus shape. And this is pretty much a bullwhip situation that we have here.
Yeah, and let's be realistic. If you look at the development over a period of 2 years of plus 35.4%, no market behaves like that you see an increase of 34.4%. Even so, once in a while, there are still people running around in the market who try to tell you the next chip crisis is coming and you better start buying now. Yeah? They are just trying to provoke you to spend more money and build up inventory, but it's useless and it is not needed. You just fill the warehouses of your customers. And if we look at it further in detail, like for example in Flex in Poland, they had a minus of 37.4%, and in Hungary they had a plus of 2.4%, and those two on average minus 13.4%. So you see still they are in line with all the other companies. And this is what I found from the annual report of a UK company, which I found very characteristic for the situation. They said the electronics component market is now returning to a level of previously seen prior to the shortages and problems of supply of the last 3 years. That I disagree. There was no problems of supply, only caused by artificial demand. Many customers are now finding their stock levels are too high and consequently deferring orders and deliveries, which is impacting turnover in the current financial year. Group turnover for 24 is anticipated to fall by around 25%, with a consequential fall in profits. That is very much explaining the situation. And if we now look at this situation in DACH, and that number, I have to say, will deviate from the charts which we're going to see later. You see Germany over here with 16.6% minus. From the annual survey, it was 17.8%. But meanwhile, we have a bigger database. We have 71% real values. On the survey, we had 67%. And you see, over the last 3 years, 21, 22, 23, always nearly two-digit growth rates. Yeah? And only in Austria in 21, you see only plus 0.4. That was a real chip crisis. Now, you need to know that in Austria, 25% of all EMS revenues are for the automotive industry. And the automotive industry had problems because microcontrollers are used by 41% by the automotive industry. And microcontrollers in 2021 were short, and I'm not repeating all the details, but there were 2 NXP factories in Texas in February shut down. There was one factory in March in Japan, which had a big fire, Renesas. And those 3 factories could not manufacture semiconductors, and they manufactured in the majority microcontrollers. So microcontrollers became short. The problem was that the rumor spread, people not knowing that there is not just one semiconductor, chips are short. That was a problem, yeah? And that was a panic reaction which was totally stupid. Yeah? But you see already in 22 in Austria the business picked up. And now tell me, anybody tell me, how were they able to achieve those growth rates if they had no chips? Did they supply the PCBA without semiconductors? No, they did not. Yeah? So in 24, we are seeing on a DACH level a decline of 16%. And and you have seen this chart before, we have been able to look at it in a different way. We looked at the average growth rate from 2013 to 2019, and that was 5.8%. Yeah? Not more, not less. So if you then assume that after the Corona crisis, we would have had a normal growth rate, then you can see we would have been somewhere over here. But instead, even so not having any semiconductors, you poor fellas, you were able to increase your revenues, and 1/3 of the increase was price increases, because the semiconductor industry wasn't stupid. They used this, what you call chip crisis, they used it to increase the prices. Yeah? I would have done that as well. Yeah? So, but the rest of it was overproduction. That overproduction went into the warehouses of your customers. And now, this is the same chart for Scandinavia. In actual fact, I have these charts for all different countries in Europe. And if you want to see them, you have to plan that you're going to be here until tomorrow morning before I finish all of that.
So this is, again, a distribution here for the DACH 23 to 24. And yeah, quite similar picture. We had 12 closings of the which all were very small companies, I believe 11 of those in Germany, and those range, the decrease ranged from -30 to for the very unlucky to -5 for the lesser unlucky. But also on the other side, we had some growth. Some companies, 24 or 14%, were able to achieve even higher revenues. So that brings us to an average all -17, for Austria -14, and for Switzerland -13.7%. And now this for Germany here. For Germany, the picture, these are the 11 ones I mentioned earlier, which had to close shop, unfortunately, and average -17.8%. And this is actually quite interesting because what you can see here, this is like systemization into revenue groups. You can see on the very left-hand side, XXL, XLL, MS, and XS. So every company who has more than 100 million euros in revenue is XXL. Every company who has between 10 and 20 million is M, and XS is the very small, so this is below 5 million. And what is particularly interesting is where the arrow is. So the very big companies had -21.6%. However, the XL and the less had less decline. And now the arrow switched to the right-hand side, and this is something that we already had mentioned earlier. They had -21.6% decrease in revenue. However, they only had a decrease of -0.8% in headcount. And that's definitely interesting. And if we want to interpret this data and look at that, what we can see for the XXL group here is that the revenue increased 44% from 21 to 23. And then we see this very strong decrease from 24 to 23, and this is -26. However, further down below, the smaller companies, they had less increase, but also less decrease. So the curve was not so strong, so to say.
Looking at the export rates, there's not much to say about it. It's a logic thing. The smaller a company, the less exports they do, because they normally don't have the manpower to do all the export business and the paperwork, but as well they don't have the people to travel outside their home country to acquire additional jobs. And what you see as well is that overall, normally in a critical situation, the export rates decline more than the domestic market. Now, looking at the inventory development in Germany, it's all nearly the same. Even so, there had been times when, especially the small ones, had an inventory level of 50 to 60% of revenues. So they were afraid that they were losing out, and therefore they were building up more inventory than the big ones. But now we are still too high, no question about that, because if you look at the red line, that is a 15% line, and from 2013 to 2019, on average, all companies had raw material inventory of about 15% of their annual sales. Now, going to the market segments, again, we have those charts, not just for all of Germany, but for all individual revenue groups. And again, I have to threaten that you sit here until tomorrow morning if I show you them all. But what you see is, you see some blue numbers on the right side, but you have to watch out as well on the strange, no, it doesn't work over here. The consumer electronics, who had a slight increase, only has a 3.1% market share of all the market segments. The same goes for the agriculture business, who had an increase of revenues, but again, only 2.2%. And further down, you see aerospace and defense, and that had a substantial growth of 29%. But again, in Germany, it only has 3.7%, whereas in other countries like France, like Italy, like the UK, and to a certain extent Scandinavia, they have much higher shares of defense electronics. So the biggest decline we saw in the industrial electronics, including the subdivision measurement systems and sensor and control systems and sensors, as well as the automotive industry. And the automotive industry we consider very critical. Now, if we now look at the revenues per head, again, we have seen that for Europe, and it is not different for the different revenue groups in Germany. There is a decline in revenue per head, and over here we as well calculate added value per head, because we have those numbers as well. And you see as well that added value per head was declining due to the fact that the people did not reduce headcount too much. Now, we've seen this chart over here for Europe, and it was only showing you 2 lines. Now, over here you see 3 lines, and that's what I explained before. The light blue line is a line for 2023, what we consider the range of order backlog, and then the calculated range for order backlog for 24 was the dark blue line. But as I said, that is artificial due to the fact that there was no full usage of capacity. And if you take instead the 23 revenues and divide them by 240 days, you get to the red one, and you can see you're very closer to the left red bar, which is 150 days. And that is what we normally consider a critical line. Because on average, you need normally about 150 days. If you are talking about some special semiconductor which have longer lead times, then you need up to 150 days. And so you better make sure that you always have an order backlog above 150 days.
And now we are back to a top list. Top 30 EMS ODM in Germany 2025. So led by Zollner. And what you can see here is from 2025, 2024, 2023, the change in position, so to see. And there's a lot of movement in there, mostly due to M&A. And this is the example that I wanted to show you earlier. If you look at rank 12 in 2025, this is C-Core. And C-Core has grown from 41 to 12 through to acquisition, actually. And what's also interesting, C-Core is even the number 1 in the UK market now. And now we would like to look more into the future, and therefore we have prepared this chart here. What you can see is data from the Component Distributors Association. It gives you the bookings, the billings, and the book-to-bill in the line, basically, starting in the Q1 23 until the Q1 25, and you saw like a decrease in billings and bookings, and then you can see like a little nick in the line where the book-to-bill ratio started to increase again. And now in the first quarter 25, we are at a position where for the first time the billings and the bookings are starting to get equal again. And this is like, again, future orientated, the forecast. What do we believe is going to happen in 2025? And the forecast that we provide here is a total growth of 3.1%. And for the Western EU, it will be plus 2.7, and for the Eastern EU, it will plus 3.6. But Germany will be the red lantern in this growth.
Well, yeah, and we know that you might question this chart because many of you are seeing a very flat first half of 2025. Yes, that is the case, specifically if you are a bigger company. The smaller ones already see a slight improvement of the business in the second quarter of 2025, and the big ones see nothing in the first half year, but still we hope that they're going to be able to see, for example, in Germany, a pickup of the business by 3.2% in the second half, which means for the full year it was going to be in Germany, it's going to be plus 1.6%. And that is due to the specific economic situation of Germany, with a recession 3 years in a row now, and we still need time to get out of it. In the other European countries, we're going to see a better development. Now, that brings me to something where I say be very careful. What happens at the moment is that there is this guy called Donald Trump, who is installing tariffs all the time. Monday, tariffs are high. Tuesday, tariffs are low. Wednesday, they are high again. Now, what does the American electronics industry do? They watch out when the tariffs are low, and then they start buying components, and they are actually hoarding components. They are building up inventory in the United States. And you might already have been able to see that the delivery times over here in Europe are slightly affected. They are increasing. Not substantially, but they are increasing. I have to warn you, don't take this to assume that there is going to be the next chip crisis and start hoarding as well. Yeah? Because Europe is not affected. Yeah? If you buy semiconductors in the Far East, you don't have the tariffs. Yeah? It's just the Americans who have them. Yeah? And the Americans are affecting the delivery time, and it's going to be going slightly up, but it's not something where we're going to see a similar situation to 2021 if we all are reasonable. You need to make sure that you stick with your existing supply chain. You need to make sure that you communicate with your distributors on a regular basis to make sure that you catch all developments. Yeah? And if you're reasonable, this is not going to be a problem for you. Yeah? And again, I love this chart because it shows over the last, I think, 30 years or even more, 30 years, the development of the electronics industry. On average, the electronics industry grew 3 to 4% per year. We have never, ever seen a huge jump. And in the long time I have been doing statistics, I learned one thing, because I used to be a novice as well, and I have had a master who taught me the statistics when I was still working with ZVEE in Germany. And that master told me, the market never jumps, and he was totally right about that. The market doesn't jump. Yeah? So if somebody now tells you, hey, watch out, the next chip crisis is coming because there's going to be huge demand for artificial intelligence. Yeah? No, those people don't even have normal intelligence. And that's why they are trying to tell you that you should build up inventory as well, so they are able to increase their revenues. Yeah? That doesn't happen. Yeah? And now a specific one on the automotive industry. I have to warn you on the automotive industry. We're going to see a lot of developments at the moment. Yeah? One starts with the fact that the automotive electronics industries are changing as well. Just to give you one example is Apple CarPlay, which is coming. And I can assure you new products will have a huge display with a touch screen. All these switches and knobs and you had in the past will be gone. Yeah? So there is a lot of small individual electronics disappear. Now don't assume that you're then going to be able to manufacture all these large LCD panels with the appropriate software. No, you won't. That products are manufactured in China. And one of the big companies manufacturing that is Compal. Yeah? And they're, for example, supplying all the 6 different car brands of Stellantis with those products. And only after the Corona crisis happened and the supply chain was disrupted for the automotive industry started pushing their Far Eastern suppliers that they needed to build up a supply in Europe. So Compal, for example, has built up a factory near Wrocław in Poland. That factory is now already running with more than 200 people. The final build-up will be about 380 to 400 people, and it will be manufacturing in clean room, class 8. Yeah? So most of the normal EMS companies don't have that at all. Yeah? And yes, you could call this a reshoring, but it's a reshoring where the European electronics industry doesn't win anything. Yeah? And the second example is what you might have been able to read this week, is that all circuits in France has been sold to a Chinese supplier. And All Circuits is a huge company supplying the automotive industry as well with electronics. So all of a sudden that is now electronics coming out of China. And it wouldn't wonder me if some of that is then transferred from France to China. Yeah? So that is the threat. Yeah? And only mature products will stay with you. But again, mature products are under a lot of price pressure, and they will be moving further to Eastern Europe, to the Balkans, to Anatolia, and you won't see those products. In addition, the automotive industry will be hit again by Donald Trump. You heard that he hates it to see so many Mercedes on Fifth Avenue in New York, and he wants to prevent that to happen. And we have the fifth biggest trade deficit in Germany against the United States. And Trump will imply tariffs, so we will not be able to easily sell cars in the United States anymore. Yeah? And that means as well that Germany will see lower growth rates in 25 and 26 in the automotive industry, and that will hurt all the suppliers.
What you can see here is like the M&A 2022 to 2025, and the bars, they have different colors. The dark blue is EMS, the red one is PCB, light blue is private equity, and the gray one is OEM. So in OEM, we saw, in EMS, we saw like the typical consolidation movements. More companies try to grow, and you can see, okay, there is a lot of going on between 2021 and 2024. Picture is a little different, but also, how should I say, especially in 2024, a lot of activity when it comes to the PCB. This is mostly, or this is just distributors buying other trading companies. On the OEM side, this is like OEMs who buy their supplier mostly. And when it comes to the private equity, this is especially interesting because when the market grew very much, they were very interested, of course. Like you see a lot of activity, 13 deals in 2021 and so on. But recently we see like a decline. I would say like they got cold feet a little bit because the market has turned. So this is the situation with the private equity companies. And when you look into the country of the buyers, so to say, you see a lot of going on in France. So you have probably read about Alliance Electronics, Argonne Group, Groupe Sunov going on there, who grow inorganically. In Germany, a lot of activities. You heard about Kartec and Kontron, of course. And then when you look into Switzerland, there is Cicor, of course. And in Sweden, those are the big Swedish companies, Hansa, Inission, and so on, who are leading the field.
And if you just mention Cicor, we are watching Cicor very closely because they have a very interesting success story. By the way, they are using our numbers as a reference for their development, which means as well there's no question that they're going to be successful. We see that Cicor is very aggressively working on the M&A market. And as Christoph earlier said, if we look at the top 25 EMS companies in the UK, Cicor only with M&A activities was able to put themselves up on position number 1. And not only that, Cicor has a very dedicated strategy. They don't buy any company who has not at least 85% of their business in the industrial, the medical, and the airspace and defense industry. They will never touch a company who has a higher share in the automotive industry because they think automotive sucks. Yeah? So, and in UK, they will be very successful, and they're not just the number 1 in the UK in regards to EMS. They have become the biggest company in the UK to manufacture defense electronics. Yeah? And that is quite a success. And if you look at their development, Alexander Hagemann, the CEO, on the annual meeting of the shareholders in April, made the announcement that they have a clear goal until 2028. They want to have achieved 1 billion Swiss franc in revenues. And if you look at their acquisition history, they came from about 200 million in about 5 years ago, and they are now at about 740 to 750 million. And I bet they're going to achieve the goal until 2028 to have 1 billion. The only question is, whom are they going to buy? Okay, good. Now, that requires as well, if you are in dedicated market segments, that you look at how to achieve that. Number one, you don't achieve changing your market segments by hiring additional salespeople. It doesn't work for the simple reason, as you know, generating a new customer takes you 1.5 to 2.5 years before it works. Too long. Yeah? If you want to change your market segments, you need to do that by acquisition. You need to buy a company that is working in your preferred market segments. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And then you need to look at the certifications, because see, if you are today manufacturing the lightning systems for the Airbus, that doesn't make you an aerospace and defense supplier. No, yeah, because that is not a system critical product, and it doesn't require you to have AS 9100 certification. Yeah? If you really want to play in the field of aerospace and defense, you need to have AS 9100. And we have checked on all these things. People are focusing a lot on the environmental certifications, whereas in the United States, nobody cares about that. Yeah? It's only in Europe we are so hysterical to have all these sustainability certificates. If you go to 13485, which is a certificate for the medical industry, you see there the United States has 27% of all companies having this certificate. In the UK, it's 21%. In Germany, it's only 14.5%. Instead, Germany has the highest share of companies with the automotive certification, 16949. Yeah? And again, you see UK and the United States, they all have AS or EN 9100, whereas in Germany it's just 3.4%. And then we have ITAR, which in Germany nobody has, and FDA approval as well is on a very low range. And if we look at that in Germany once again, we see that those are the companies by revenue size, and you see the big ones more than 300 million. 80% of the companies have the 13485 certification, whereas on the other side, there is only 6 companies out of 173 which have this certificate, and they are all in the revenue groups below 2 million. But even more important is certification for AS 9100. We did this analysis about 3 years ago, and when we did the analysis, there were only 10 companies in Germany having AS 9100. By now, and this is just very fresh, we did that a month ago. Yeah, and now it nearly doubled. It's 19 companies now. So there is an improvement, but it's far insufficient. That brings us to the final thing. We all know that geopolitics are changing. And with changing geopolitics, you need to watch out whom you trust as a supplier of your electronics. And we are at the moment, together IPC and ZVE are working in Brussels on a legislation change. We want all system-critical electronics to be manufactured in Europe. And we need to have a legislation for that. And I can assure you, we're going to push very hard to get that. Yeah? We want to break the supply of PCBs for aerospace and defense from China. yeah, and want to manufacture that in Europe. And even so, today we don't have the capacity, but we can build up the capacity to get there. Yeah? And one thing as well is for sure, there will not be a simple business as usual anymore. If you look from the time 2019, shortly before Corona, until today, the only constant we have seen is the constant change with new challenges. So if you, with your business, want to stay ahead, you need to carefully watch the market, watch the development, and we can only offer you to come to us because we supply you with the analysis of the market with our qualified market numbers. Yeah? And that is the basis. And then you need to develop a vision. You need to know exactly where do you want to go with your company. Yeah? And once you have this vision, you need to develop a strategy. And that strategy you have then to make happen by making decisions. Yeah? Don't be afraid to make wrong decisions. Yeah? Make decisions, make them fast. Yeah? And if you find out they're wrong, change them again and make new decisions. Yeah? But make decisions. Try to be innovative. And one thing is the most important thing at all. And even so, at my age, I learned that every day. That the whole life is a pure learning. You need to learn every day in order to stay ahead. Thank you very much.